Hi, my name is Brian Pace. I'm the Politics and Ecology editor at Symposia. Yesterday afternoon, as we're all aware, there was an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. At the center of it, as in he was in the rotunda wearing a headdress, is a man named Jake and Jelly, which is likely a stage name. He also goes by the name of Yellowstone Wolf, and he's a former or perhaps practicing psychedelic guru. He's written on neo-shamanism, as well as talked about QAnon conspiracies. His social media is in the process of being taken down, and the link is broken, but I have access to it right now. So here's Jake and Jelly sharing some of his ideas about life, the universe, and everything. We have this material that I'm pretty sure isn't hosted anywhere else.
Hi, I'm Yellowstone Wolf, and I'd like to welcome you to the Ascension, DNA, Frequency, and Evolution Masterclass at Starseed Academy. Now, for those of you who don't know exactly what Ascension is the process of evolution that goes on an individual basis as well as on a planetary scale whenever a species reaches a certain amount or a certain frequency of intelligence.
Okay, I just have to stop it right here, and please feel free to chime in, and I'll stop it whenever for commentary. So this video sets my teeth on edge with my training as an evolutionary biologist. And, you know, facts matter. He's talking about the literal process of evolution. He's got a whiteboard. He's not offering any sources for anything that he's talking about. So let's just get that on the table here. But he's going to talk about some evolutionary ideas that he's got.
A certain amount of intelligence or a certain frequency of vibration. Now, not a whole lot of people quite understand the implications of that and how it is that a planet can undergo the ascension process. So that's what I'm here to talk about in this series of classes. This is going to be broken down into 3 parts, okay? And we're going to lay some groundwork in this first portion of the class, and then the second one's going to get a little bit deeper, and then the...
Okay. I also want to just point out like the grandiosity here about planetary ascension, something that's like super common with people who, you know, have sort of failed to integrate their, their psychedelic experiences. This is somebody who's in what I've heard therapists refer to as the inflationary period.
And also just to point out, so we also have, there's 2 other things going on as well, right? You've got the individualized, he hasn't said enough to, you know, maybe confirm, but like this potentially neoliberal conceptualization of evolve yourself, and that will contribute to this planetary evolution, which goes back to ideas that we've critiqued here numerous times. But then also, as you point out, with the grandiosity and the numerous words that have no definition, no explanation, and he's in the process of telling us how we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper, but it's just fucking word salad. Like there's no anything.
Pace, what's the date on this video?
I am not sure that I have that information able to displayable. So if I find it, I will mention it later. But here's the thing: my awareness of his activities as a psychedelic advocate, they're recent. He was on it. I know of at least 2 psychedelic adjacent or specific podcasts that Angeli was a guest on, and the one that I have a date for sure was. Like a little more than a year and a half ago, or I
think that was 2018. So this is probably in the 2017, 2018 kind of.
That's kind of what I'm. That was the time frame that I talked about in the video. So yeah.
I also want to throw out there just to flag, because Pace, you mentioned integration, and while this may be an inflationary period, going back to the earlier comments in this video or in this podcast, like the reality is that we don't know what integration would necessarily look like, right? When we're talking about integrating psychedelic ideas or psychedelic experiences into underlying personalities, ideologies, what have you, right? I've seen a number of comments on our social media pages over the last few days talking about, oh, this could all be solved through integration. But if he had a white supremacist, neo-fascist underlying ideology, integrating his inflationary period into those ideologies and worldviews is not necessarily going to address the problems that we're seeing.
Listen, where we're at right now, with the rapid mainstreaming of psychedelics and what the mainstream currently looks like in a post-Trumpism world, it may be possible to receive integration from a fascist adjacent integration therapist. So yeah, thank you for that insight. Let's get back to the video here.
The third one, that's when we're going to talk about planetary ascension and the idea of a solar system ascending as a whole. So, to begin this class, let's start with the idea that DNA sends and receives, and therefore it also stores light and information.
DNA doesn't store light, just so we're clear.
It's all light though, bro.
Something?
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to it.
Now, it's able to do this through the activated antenna on the DNA. The antenna on our DNA is activated based on emotions and thoughts.
Let's also be clear, there are no antenna on DNA. DNA is made of nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, and phosphorus. Okay?
Could we also just stress for anybody who's not, immersed in woo circles, that these are not ideas that he's come up with. Like, these are ideas that circulate in like new age communities.
Yes.
This sounds like a class being offered if I went down to Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. There'd be like a little hut set up with this guy like selling shit down there.
To festivals where these fucking talks are going on, right? Like I've sat adjacent
I'm not a
to the
festival
stage.
goer, so that was the closest thing I could come up with.
Yeah, but that's the thing. This stuff runs rampant through the space, and then people are like, "Gee, like, where's it coming from?"
Right.
Sorry.
Okay. No, I agree. I second that, Dave. So.
Now, if you haven't seen my previous classes at Starseed Academy, whether it be, how to free your mind, or the series of classes that are expanding consciousness, or the series of classes of enhancing intelligence and ESP, I highly recommend you look into those.
Of course, he highly recommends you look into those. I'm really sad that I wasn't able to capture the one on like ESP or the ones on several of the ones that I had some commentary on the scroll through. So there was yeah, particularly the one where he opines about politics. But this is what we.
Hey, I mean, it's great. Well, it's great that this even exists.
Well, right. and at the same, I will say it sucks that this exists in the first place. I'm glad you captured it. And as far as the political shit goes, it's like we have, as far as I understand, there's numerous documented instances of him, protesting Black Lives Matter folks, coming out very pro-cop. I mean, his political stances have been made clear. It would be interesting to get some insight into the sort of narratives that he was promoting from this particular platform and in this manner. But
yeah. It's clear that he's, fascinated with the occult, but even the historical actual Nazis were fascinated with the occult. So none of that is incongruous. And I mean, with regard to like, go on. What were you going to say?
Nothing. I just caught a glimpse of Dr. Emoto and I realized
we're coming up on it.
There.
That's where we're going. Can I just quickly say, I recently watched, the leftist political streamer Vosh recently did a kind of watch through of one of the spirit science animated videos, which I really recommend in terms of like a leftist perspective on some of these new age philosophies, because he was pointing out how much sort of like Nazi ideology, fascist ideology is kind of embedded in aspects of the planetary ascension mythos, like even when it's not explicitly identified with white nationalism. So we can link that as well.
And that goes back all the way to sort of the roots of occultism. If you look at, say, the writings of Madame
Blavatsky.
Blavatsky, there's a lot of eugenics narratives there. Aleister Crowley was, not exactly a progressive guy. So there's a lot of authoritarianism that, in terms of the direct lineages of the Nazis. We also have Julius Evola, who was, somebody who laid the philosophical groundwork for the Italian Fascist Party. Also embraced, experimentation of one's consciousness with drugs. But let's keep moving through the video here,
because that'll give you a little bit, it'll give you way more groundwork as to how all this stuff works. But this class is going to be a thing in and of itself, and I'm just going to give a brief synopsis of some of these larger concepts that I went into deeper in these other classes. So the idea of these antennae being activated based on emotions and thoughts is actually something from the Heart Math Institute. And the idea is that whenever we have emotions of, say, bliss, of love, of peace, that we have these waves of frequency that correspond to these emotions. And these waves of frequency, when mapped over our DNA, have a very profound effect on the way our DNA functions. For example,
citation, please. Like, Heart Math Institute is not credible, but
well, this also goes back to the whole secret ideology. It's not only in The Secret, but that's kind of like one of the more well-known versions of it, where you are responsible for projecting the kinds of experiences that you have in the world. And so if you are having a hard time, it's because you're living in this fear consciousness, scarcity consciousness, and it's sort of like an individualistic neoliberal approach to social problems. So it's like, if you were to just embody the confidence that would let you stride into the capital, good things will come to you.
Yeah, I feel like we could replace this guy with Patrick Swayze from Donnie Darko, like talking about moving from fear into love. But anyhow, let's get back into it.
Example, high frequency emotions of love, of peace, of joy, of bliss, they have a very rapid wave form, very, very large peaks and valleys of the waveform. Okay, and when we map these peaks and valleys over the DNA, we see that where this frequency hits the DNA has antennae on it that are responsible for sending and receiving light information to and from the universe. They become activated. These antennae become activated.
So, some of this is actually going into, pretty standard psychedelic territory. Like, for a long time, we had the Mayan 2012 people talking about how when 2012 happened, our 72, like inert codons of DNA would become activated, and then time would become art. This is entirely continuous with things that have long been discussed within the psychedelic community.
I remember in 2012 sitting on the back porch of a row house in up in Pennsylvania, as the Psychedemia conference was preparing, and somebody plopping down and starting to go on a rant about how they knew that the secret of psychedelics was that you take them and you go into your DNA, and what is revealed through your DNA is your fate, it's your lineage, it's your past, present, and future. And the person across the table was I think a PhD in biology, who was, a student from abroad, who just like tore into them and was like, look, I love psychedelics. I've had some of my most profound life experiences, and here are all the ways that you're wrong. And you could see that
person was there.
But everything that jumped up, there was no interchange or exchange, right? The person immediately snapped to defensiveness, explaining how, his experiences informed him that he was aware of the truth, capital T. And it was, this is a decade ago, right? Like, or nearly. So yeah.
It's so
disappointing.
Where I was in 2012 in December, mind you, was the Mayan highlands of Chiapas, Mexico. And
did you ascend?
I ascended every day to go to my house, which was on top of a very big hill. But I can tell you that exactly no one was talking about 2012. All that shit was happening in Tulum. But you're talking about an actual Mayan community. It's just ridiculous appropriation that went on for too long in the psychedelic community, and this is sort of similar with that. So
just say a quick aside. I just found it personally like kind of amusing, like not to read into it, but as the Psychedemia conference was happening at Penn, the Penn Archaeological Museum had a special Maya 2012 exhibit, and they had specifically like borrowed and imported all of these like, you know, actual Mayan artifacts, but it was because of this Western reconfiguration, you know, that there was an interest. But I thought McKenna would get kind of a kick out of the fact that that was happening next door.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Okay, and these antennae are able to send and receive more and more light and information. And the higher and higher states of bliss we go into, the more and more antennae are activated on our DNA. Now, that also means that when we have low frequency emotions that are very shallow and broad in their waveform, there's far less of these antennae that are activated in our DNA. Now, the emotions that are corresponding to these low frequencies of emotion and thought form, these are things like depression, anxiety, and fear. So whenever we're having these low frequencies of emotion like anxiety, depression, and fear, we are literally activating far less antenna on our DNA that are responsible for sending and receiving light and information to the universe.
This is like spiritual bypassing 101.
Yep.
You know, so whatever you do, if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, or fear, that these are low vibrational, you know, things that are affecting your DNA. You might be screwing up your children for generations because you're feeling feelings.
Well, which runs smack dab into the various critiques we've offered of the psychedelic self-help folks. And the notion that, oh, you just need to stop feeling the emotions you're feeling, or, oh, you know, it's all your focus and what you're focusing on rather than the fact that you live within the context of industrial civilization and capitalism, you know, the fact that you work a bullshit job, the fact that there's nonstop wars and ecocide and the rest of it. And, you know, go figure, the guy's selling courses.
Well, and I mean, here's the thing, he's using tactics that come straight out of the large group awareness training you know, handbook, like the various sort of groups that came out of the mind dynamics, things that spread into things like everything from Scientology to other similar organizations.
I just have to point out he's not even using the word antenna properly. He's using the singular. It's actually antennae.
All right, here we go.
Don't point that out. It would just look like jerks.
So all that being said, we send and receive and therefore store this light and information through these activated antennae, and these activated antennae are activated based on our thoughts and our emotions. So the information and the light that is stored in our DNA alters the DNA, and this is what's responsible.
I mean, I guess those were the antenna. No, those are nitrogenous base pairs. Anyhow,
responsible for the evolution of the organism. So, in other words, what we experience.
I guess we're gonna turn into weird, furry, phosphorescent sea slugs. Like,
we're gonna turn into an Alex Gray painting.
Hang on.
Alters the DNA, and this is what's responsible.
Right, let's talk about that. Oh, okay. Hang on. It's there's a chakra diagram here. If we just, before you explode into light.
And this is what's responsible.
It's too bright.
We can see it. Yeah.
You can see it. There it is. There it is. So yeah, so we're moving into sort of you know, Hinduism, Tantra stuff, and this is somehow related to our DNA. Yeah.
Responsible for the evolution of the organism. So, in other words, what we experience in our day-to-day life, whether that be through external stimuli or through internal stimuli like thoughts and emotions, that changes our DNA, because the information of that experience that we had in reality, whether that be a thought, emotion, or an external stimuli felt by the senses or perceived by the senses, that alters the DNA, because that information is stored in the DNA as light and information, and it changes the DNA.
The information is stored in the DNA as light and information.
Yeah, so cool. let's talk about that. He's talking about something that is effectively a bastardization of Lamarckian theory, which was something that was prior to Darwinianism. And the classic example was that there was a beast that was the ancestor of the giraffe, and it would spend its life reaching for leaves on tall trees, and throughout its life it may have stretched its neck a little bit, and so therefore its progeny would have longer necks. This is essentially what he's describing. There is evidence of experiential environmental alterations on one's DNA that can be heritable through the silencing of certain genes through DNA methylation. But again, this is a chemical process. It's in the world of epigenetics. None of this has anything to do with light, although yes, it does have something to do with information. This is pseudoscience.
That new light, that new information, and that new information storage. Okay, so with that being understood, then it's very important to understand that light and information is what's altering our DNA, and that's how we evolve as creatures, not just as humans, but everything. Whether that be plants, animals, fungi, insects. Okay, all of its DNA is altered in one way or another.
I just gotta say that there is there's a lot of definitions of fascism, but I think the ones that are most historically and contemporary in their accuracy note the anti-intellectualism of fascism, because you can't let things like facts getting in the way of your simple to transform into propaganda narratives about, say, white skin being equated to nation, and following a leader even though they contradict themselves in their previous statements. So for those watching who are like, well, this isn't, this is just woo, it's harmless. Well, we already know that this person was at the vanguard of a violent insurrection, a coup attempt that left 5 people and counting dead, and laid the groundwork likely for future violence. So anti-intellectualism, wherever we find it, is something that we should be skeptical of.
By the environment and environmental pressures, or by thoughts and emotions. Okay? Now we have to get into the idea of Dr. Emoto's work in Japan.
Over and over and over. Dr. Emoto's water experiment has been debunked time and time and time again, and it keeps coming up.
Tell us about it.
Tell us how you really feel, Dave.
No, I encountered Dr. Emoto's water experiment as a young person whose parents took him to see What the Bleep Do We Know? And I remember being like really fascinated. And it's like what they talked to different water. They exposed different samples of water to different emotional states, and the water supposedly formed like different structures. I don't remember if they were actually crystalline or whatever, but happy water is different than angry water.
Well, it's angry because you're yelling at it.
Yeah, well, that's why you need to adjust your vibrations. So now cymatics, on the other hand, if you've ever seen somebody put some sand on a speaker and like resonated at particular frequencies, that shit is dope. This shit is pseudoscience. But it's been debunked over and over and over again. And like, I part of the reason that, and sorry, I'm finding it hard to speak because this has literally been one of the things that has pervaded the psychedelic space for the entirety of my participation in it. Yep. And the fact that it is one, so frequently debunked, and 2, like still around, it's just mind boggling. And I think it goes back to that anti-intellectualism. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to actually do some digging and realize that there's no there. And yet people still propagate it, I imagine, because it says the things that they want to hear, and because they find it inspiring or refreshing or reassuring. And yet, like, it's a simplified explanation of the world that we live in that doesn't actually have a basis in reality.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to say, Dave, you're about to get another dose.
If you're not familiar with Dr. Emoto is a Japanese scientist and doctor who did an experiment with water and water crystals. Basically, the long and short of it is he put water in a bunch of water bottles, and then he went up to each individual water
Materials and methods.
bottle and he wrote a word or a phrase on each individual water bottle that corresponded with a human emotion or thought. And then every single day he would go up to each of those water bottles and he would feel and project the thought and the emotion of that word on that water bottle into that particular water bottle, whether that be love, whether that be compassion, whether that be I will kill you or you fool or whatever it is. He experimented using positive emotions and thoughts and negative emotions and thoughts, and then he took a drop from each water bottle and he froze it on like a petri dish basically, and he put it under the microscope.
It's
Crystals, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I like crystals, but they are an extractive product, and yeah, here we go. You fool.
Saw that his thoughts and his emotions affected the molecular.
Actually, you know, I gotta say, I don't think Jake and Jelly comments on this, but like right in the right hand lower corner, we have polluted water before prayer and polluted water after prayer, and I gotta take some serious issue with this. I mean, first time out of the country that I ever went anywhere, I went to India when I was about 22, and I visited Bhopal. And Bhopal is where Union Carbide had a runaway chemical reaction that exploded, and a dense cloud of methyl isocyanate descended on a city of 8 million people and contaminated their groundwater. This was in 1984. And to this day, they have their drinking water brought in on trucks. Now, India is a very pious place. If prayer could purify water, it would have happened there. And I find this troubling.
Because they're not praying to a Christian God. They just need to pray to the right God in order to pray away the fallout of industrial civilization. Gosh,
Yeah.
Duh.
The structure of the water profoundly. Okay? So Dr. Emoto's work with water and thoughts and emotions, or basically the human bioelectromagnetic field, is proof that our vibe, our emotions, our thoughts have a very profound effect, not just on water, not just on the environment, but also on our DNA. Okay? So taking the idea that our thoughts and our emotions are activating the DNA, and the information that is stored based on the activated DNA is what creates for an altering in our DNA, which is what creates for the evolution of the organism. So our DNA being altered due to our thoughts and emotions and external stimuli is what creates the evolution of the organism. And
that's not what creates the evolution of the organism.
Are you sure about that? Are you a doctor? Because the doctor guy was a doctor.
The one thing I'm a doctor in is some form of evolutionary biology, and this I have a headache.
If you compile Dr. Emoto's discovery of the way that our thoughts and our emotions are essentially the human bioelectromagnetic field, how that affects the molecular structure of water, and then take into account the idea that the human body is made of.
And we talked about thought leaders, in a recent podcast, and in terms of how this guy is like carrying himself, the confidence with which he's projecting his ideas, it doesn't seem that different to me from a lot of the psychedelic thought leaders that are already like in the mainstream psychedelic like space right now.
No, he's picking up on things that are laying around. So and important to note, he's not explicitly talking about psychedelics in these lectures, but from his blog post, he is very explicit. He's using concepts that people have often, used the psychedelic experience to validate from a subjective level. Like, so, I know that chakras are real because I was on 2CI and I could feel my heart chakra open, that kind of thing.
Well, and his philosophy about psychedelic use is based around all of this like energy kind of this is the philosophy within which he's like interested in psychedelics, and he feels that psychedelics can influence people's lives. So it seems very connected to me.
Yeah, this slots right in with psychedelic gobbledygook, like woo, perfectly.
Yep.
You can tell that this guy has been tripping and thinking he's fucking, the Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's more material, if it craps out. So we'll just.
All right. So
okay,
this is part 2 of Ascension DNA frequency.
Okay, so yeah, this is where it cuts out. I believe there's no more material here. So I mean, you can see that, this was just what I was able to retrieve from my phone. Obviously, there was probably hours of material that Angeli had produced. I'm going to stop sharing right now so that we can sort of get back to things. There we go. And yeah, I just thought that it was particularly relevant. I mean, that we were talking about one individual who, chose to, be in the vanguard, the forefront of an attempt to not just overthrow the government. I mean, because the reality is that to overthrow, they got no operational buildings. Like the U.S. Capitol building is just a building. However, that building was full of the legislative arm of the U.S. government, and had things gone differently, they seemed fully intent on kidnapping people.
Oh, they would have killed
executing
people. They would have executed a lot of them.
Yeah,
absolutely. Without like meat shields there, absolutely, they would have. They would have massacred. They would have hanged Pence. Absolutely.
Yep. I mean, and this individual in particular, when he went onto the Senate floor using his theatrical garb and his theatrical voice, because he was an actor, he very he goes, "Where is Pence? What do you want Pence
He's like
for,
a fucking Visigoth sacking Rome."
Right.